wiped grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better days, just like everything else in his repair bay on 7 Station. The smell of burnt circuitry and recycled air filled his nostrils as he stared at the overdue payment notices flickering on his workbench screen. 3 months behind on dock fees, 2 months behind on parts suppliers, and his last customer had paid him in credits that were worth less than the metal they were printed on. The sound of screaming engines and emergency klaxons echoed through the station's lower levels, making look up from his pile of bills. Through the grimy viewport of his workshop, he could see the familiar sight of another rich alien having a bad day in the docking bay. This time it was Prince of the Cosmic Dynasty, whose golden skin and elaborate crown made him impossible to miss even from this distance. Had seen plenty of crashes in his 15 years working the rim stations, but this one was special. The ship that Prince had just slammed into docking bay 7 looked like nothing he had ever seen before. It was sleek and dark, with curves that seemed to flow like liquid metal, and even damaged, it held a beauty that made his mechanic's heart skip a beat. Steam hissed from its hull, and sparks flew from exposed systems, but could tell that beneath the damage lay technology that was years ahead of anything currently flying. The prince stumbled out of the wreckage, his royal robes singed and his crown sitting crooked on his head. Even from his workshop, could hear the alien's voice carrying across the docking bay as he shouted at his guards and attendants. Prince was known throughout this sector for his temper, his wealth, and his complete inability to pilot anything more complex than a luxury transport. "Get this piece of junk out of my sight," the prince screamed, waving his 4 arms in wild gestures. "I never want to see this cursed ship again. It nearly killed me with its primitive controls and backward systems." Watched as the prince's guards began setting up a perimeter around the crashed ship. Standard procedure would be to have it towed to a scrapyard, where it would be torn apart for whatever valuable materials could be salvaged. The thought made stomach turn. A ship like that deserved better than ending up as raw materials for some corporation's manufacturing line. He made his decision before his brain could talk him out of it. Grabbing his tool belt and what little credit he had left, made his way through the station's maze of corridors toward the docking bay. The crowds were thick with aliens of dozens of species, all wanting to get a look at the prince's latest disaster. Pushed through with their blue skin and head tentacles, stepped around massive traders whose rock-like skin scraped against the walls, and dodged the quick movements of buzzers as they darted between larger beings. By the time reached the docking bay, Prince was in full meltdown mode. His guards stood at attention while he ranted about the ship's supposed defects and his own superior piloting skills. The crash had clearly been the prince's fault, but knew better than to point that out to a member of the Cosmic Dynasty. "Your Highness," called out, his voice surprisingly steady despite his racing heart. "I couldn't help but overhear your situation." Prince turned his 4 eyes toward, and the human felt the full weight of alien nobility bearing down on him. The prince was tall, even for his species, and his golden skin seemed to glow with an inner light that spoke of generations of genetic enhancement and medical treatments that cost more than most beings made in a lifetime. "And who might you be, little human?" the prince asked, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension that had grown used to over the years. "Some scavenger hopping to pick through my misfortune." "Your Highness, I run a repair shop here on the station," gestured toward his small workshop. "I was wondering if you might be interested in selling that ship." The prince's laughter echoed through the docking bay, causing several nearby aliens to stop and stare. "Sell it. Human, that ship is nothing but a death trap wrapped in pretty metal. It responds to no known control systems, its interface is completely alien, and it nearly killed me 3 times during what should have been a simple test flight." "I understand it's damaged, Your Highness, but perhaps with the right touch." "The right touch?" Prince's voice rose to a near shriek. "I am a prince of the Cosmic Dynasty. I have access to the finest pilots and mechanics in the galaxy. If that ship cannot be controlled by someone of my caliber, what hope could a human part swapper possibly have?" Felt his temper flare but kept his voice level. "Perhaps, Your Highness, but if the ship is truly as worthless as you say, then selling it would at least recover some small portion of your investment." The prince paused, his 4 eyes narrowing as he considered words. The Cosmic Dynasty was known for their wealth, but they were also known for their shrewdness in business. No member of the royal family had ever gotten rich by throwing away potential profit, no matter how small. What are you offering, human? Took a deep breath and named a figure that would wipe out his savings and leave him eating recycled protein for the next 6 months. It was everything he had, plus a promise to cover the bay cleanup costs. To Prince, it was probably less than he spent on lunch, but it represented every credit he could scrape together. The prince considered for a moment, his golden fingers tapping against his chin. You realize, of course, that this purchase comes with no warranty, no guarantee, and no support from my people. Once you take possession of that ship, it becomes entirely your problem. I understand, Your Highness. And you realize that if this ship kills you, as it very nearly killed me, neither I nor the Cosmic Dynasty bears any responsibility for your foolish decision. Understood, Your Highness. Prince smiled, showing teeth that had been enhanced to an almost predatory sharpness. Then you have a deal, human. Transfer the credits to my account, and this beautiful death trap is yours. His hands shook slightly as he processed the payment through his personal account. He watched his balance drop to nearly nothing, leaving him with barely enough credits to keep his workshop powered for another week. If this gamble didn't pay off, he would be homeless and broke within days. The transfer completed with a soft chime, and Prince's smile widened. Pleasure doing business with you, human. I do hope you live long enough to enjoy your purchase. The prince swept out of the docking bay with his entourage, leaving standing alone next to the crashed ship. Now that he was closer, he could see details that hadn't been visible from his workshop. The ship's hull seemed to shift slightly in the light, as if the metal itself was alive. Strange symbols flickered along its sides, appearing and disappearing in patterns that his eyes couldn't quite follow. Approached the ship carefully, running his hand along its hull. The metal was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with a rhythm that reminded him of a heartbeat. Whatever this ship was, it was unlike anything he had ever encountered in his years of working with alien technology. The entrance hatch was partially open, probably damaged in the crash. Peered inside and felt his breath catch. The interior was just as beautiful as the exterior, with flowing lines and surfaces that seemed to respond to his presence. Lights began to glow softly as he stepped aboard, illuminating a cockpit that looked more like a work of art than a functional control system. But it was damaged, that much was clear. Panels hung loose from the walls, sparking occasionally and casting strange shadows in the soft light. The pilot's seat was cracked, and several of the control surfaces were dark and unresponsive. Could see where Prince had tried to force the ship to respond to conventional controls, leaving scratches and scorch marks on surfaces that seemed too delicate for such rough treatment. Settled into the pilot's seat, feeling the ship's systems around him like a living presence. This was going to be the biggest challenge of his career, and possibly the last if he couldn't figure out how to make it work. But as he looked around the alien cockpit, feeling the ship's warmth and sensing something almost like curiosity in its responses, couldn't shake the feeling that this ship had been waiting for him. The sound of footsteps on the station's deck plates reminded him that he had work to do. Other scavengers and opportunists would already be circling, hoping to make offers for parts or systems they could strip from the ship. Had bought himself time and ownership, but now he had to prove that his gamble had been worth the risk. As he began his initial assessment of the ship's systems, couldn't know that he had just purchased something far more valuable and dangerous than a simple crashed vessel. The ship that Prince had dismissed as worthless scrap was, in fact, one of the most advanced pieces of technology ever created, and it had been waiting a very long time for the right pilot to claim it. The lights around the cockpit pulsed gently, almost as if the ship was trying to communicate. Smiled as he pulled out his diagnostic tools, ready to begin the work that would change both his life and his understanding of what was possible when human determination met alien technology that chose its own destiny. 3 days into his examination of the mysterious ship, had made discoveries that kept him awake at night and had him questioning everything he thought he knew about technology. The ship wasn't just advanced, it was impossible. The more he studied its systems, the more he realized that conventional rules of engineering simply didn't apply to whatever civilization had built this vessel. The ship's hull, for instance, seemed to be made of a material that could repair itself. Small scratches and dents from the crash were slowly disappearing, the metal flowing like liquid to restore its original shape. When he'd first noticed this happening, he had convinced himself that he was seeing things. But after marking specific damage points with his tools and watching them heal over the course of hours, he had to accept that this ship was unlike anything in his experience. Even more puzzling were the ship's control systems. Where Prince had seen primitive and unresponsive interfaces, was beginning to see something far more sophisticated. The ship didn't use traditional buttons, switches, or even the neural link systems favored by advanced alien races. Instead, it seemed to respond to something more subtle, intention, perhaps, or emotional state. Had discovered this by accident while trying to activate what he assumed was a main power system. Frustrated after hours of failed attempts to interface with the ship's computer, he had placed his hand on a smooth panel and simply wished that the ship would show him how to help it. The panel had immediately come alive under his touch, displaying information in symbols that shifted and changed until they became readable text in standard galactic common. The text had been simple but profound. Pilot recognized, beginning integration protocol. Since that moment, the ship had become increasingly responsive to his presence. Systems that had remained stubbornly dark began to show signs of life. The environmental controls started working, creating a comfortable atmosphere that seemed perfectly suited to human physiology. The lighting adjusted itself to provide optimal illumination for whatever task was performing, and the ship's mysterious gravity systems activated just enough to make movement comfortable without feeling artificial. But it was the ship's apparent intelligence that truly amazed. He had spent years working with the most advanced AI systems available on the Rim, but this ship's responses went far beyond programmed behaviors. It seemed to learn from their interactions, anticipating his needs and even making suggestions through subtle changes in its displays and interfaces. When needed a specific tool, panels would light up to indicate where such tools could be found within the ship's surprisingly complete workshop spaces. When he grew tired, the pilot's seat would adjust itself to provide better support, and the cabin lighting would shift to a warmer, more relaxing spectrum. The ship was taking care of him in ways that felt almost maternal, and found himself talking to it as he worked. "Okay, girl," he said, running his hand along a control surface that was displaying what looked like a schematic of the ship's power distribution system. "Let's see if we can figure out what's got your antimatter containment systems offline." The display shifted, zooming in on a section of the ship's engineering spaces that hadn't yet explored. A path lit up on the floor, leading from the cockpit toward what appeared to be the main engineering bay. Followed the glowing trail, marveling at the ship's ability to guide him through its corridors. The engineering section was a cathedral of alien technology. Massive columns that seemed to be made of crystallized energy reached from floor to ceiling, pulsing with soft light that painted the entire space in shifting colors. At the center of it all was what could only describe as a heart, a sphere of contained antimatter that hung suspended in a web of force fields and control systems that his understanding of physics. As approached the antimatter containment system, the ship's displays began showing him information that should have been impossible for him to understand. Complex equations and engineering principles were translated into terms that his human brain could process, presented through a combination of visual displays, gentle sounds, and even subtle vibrations through the ship's hull that seemed to communicate directly with his nervous system. He found the problem quickly. Prince's rough handling had damaged a critical component in the ship's power regulation system. It wasn't a complex repair by itself, but the technology involved was so far beyond anything had worked with that he felt like a Stone Age human trying to fix a quantum computer. But the ship helped him. Through its displays and guidance systems, it walked him through the repair process step by step. When his hands weren't steady enough for the delicate work required, the ship extended mechanical arms from the walls to assist him. When he needed specialized tools, fabrication systems he hadn't even known existed created them from raw materials stored in the ship's molecular assemblers. The repair took 12 hours, but when finally reconnected the last power coupling, the change in the ship was immediate and dramatic. The gentle pulsing of its systems became a steady, strong rhythm. Lights brightened throughout the vessel, and displays that had been dim or non-functional blazed to life with information and status updates. More importantly, could feel the ship's joy. There was no other word for it. The vessel was happy, and it was sharing that happiness with him through every system they now shared. The ship's emotional state was somehow being communicated to through the same interface that let him control its functions, creating a bond between human and machine that went far beyond simple pilot and vessel. As made his way back to the cockpit, he began to understand what he had gotten himself into. This wasn't just an advanced ship. It was a living entity in its own right, capable of forming relationships and making choices about who it worked with. Prince had failed to connect with the ship not because he lacked piloting skills, but because the vessel had chosen not to work with him. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Had always prided himself on being able to work with any piece of technology, but this ship was asking him to form a partnership rather than simply exercise ownership. It wanted a colleague, not a master. Word of unusual salvage project had begun to spread throughout 7 Station. Other mechanics and engineers started visiting his docking bay, curious about the strange ship that seemed to be repairing itself. Tried to downplay the ship's unusual capabilities, but it was hard to hide the fact that damaged systems were fixing themselves and that the vessel was responding to commands that shouldn't have worked with any known technology. Dr. Ra, an engineer who ran the station's main repair facility, spent an entire afternoon examining the ship's external systems. Her blue skin darkened with concentration as she ran sensor sweeps over the hull, and her head tentacles twitched with excitement as her instruments picked up readings that shouldn't have been possible. She said, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that marked her species' excitement. This technology is beyond anything I've seen in 40 years of starship engineering. The molecular structure of this hull material alone represents advances that our best scientists say are centuries away from practical application. Tried to look surprised by this information, but Dr. Ra was too experienced to be fooled. "You've already discovered some of its capabilities, haven't you?" she asked, fixing him with her large, compound eyes. "The way it responds to your presence, the self-repair functions, this ship has chosen you as its pilot." "That's impossible," said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Ships don't choose their pilots, they're machines." Dr. Ra's tentacles rippled in what had learned was the equivalent of laughter. "My young friend, the galaxy is full of technologies that blur the line between machine and life. What you have here is something very special and very dangerous. There are forces in this sector that would kill to possess a ship like this." As if responding to her words, the ship's external lights began to pulse in a pattern that had come to recognize as alertness or concern. The ship was listening to their conversation, and it didn't like what it was hearing about potential threats. Placed his hand on the ship's hull, feeling the warm metal respond to his touch. "Don't worry, girl," he said softly. "Nobody's taking you away from me." Dr. Ra watched this interaction with growing amazement. She said quietly, "I think you need to understand what you've gotten yourself into. That ship isn't just advanced technology, it's a legend. The way it responds, the self-modification capabilities, the apparent intelligence, I think you may have found one of the mythical wolf ships." Wolf ships looked up from the hull plating he had been examining. "I've never heard of them." "Most beings haven't," Dr. Ra explained, her voice taking on the tone she used when discussing theoretical technologies. "They're spoken of only in rumors and ancient texts. Ships that choose their own pilots, that adapt and evolve to meet any challenge. They're said to be prototypes of some long-lost civilization, designed to test the boundaries of what's possible when organic intelligence merges with mechanical precision." The ship's lights pulsed again, and felt a warm sensation that he interpreted as approval. The vessel liked being recognized for what it truly was. "If this is really a wolf ship," Dr. Ra continued, "then you're not just its owner, you're its partner. And that means you're both about to become very popular with some very dangerous people." Looked at the ship that had already begun to feel like home, thinking about the bond that was growing stronger between them every day. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew that he and his ship would face them together. The wolf ship had chosen him, and he had chosen it in return. Now they just had to prove that they were worthy of each other. The trouble started exactly 1 week after Dr. Ra identified the ship as a possible wolf ship. Was deep in the vessel's navigation systems, marveling at star charts that showed regions of space he had never heard of, when his workshop's proximity alarms began screaming. Through the ship's now active sensor systems, he could see a formation of sleek black vessels approaching 7 Station. The ships bore the crimson markings of the Hegemony Defense Corporation, one of the largest private military contractors in the sector. HDC made their money by providing security services to governments and corporations that needed problems solved with minimal questions asked. Seeing them at a backwater station like 7 could only mean one thing. Someone very important wanted something very badly. Crackled to life with station administrator's nervous voice. "Mister, please report to Docking Bay 7 immediately. You have visitors who wish to discuss your recent acquisition. The Wolf ship's interior lighting shifted to a dim red, a warning pattern that had learned indicated potential danger. The ship's consciousness was as aware of the threat as he was, and it was preparing for trouble. Could feel the vessel's defensive systems coming online through their shared connection, weapons and shields that hadn't been active since the crash. "Easy, girl," whispered, placing his hand on the nearest console. "Let's see what they want before we start a war." The ship's lights shifted to amber, indicating reluctant agreement with his decision. Made his way to the docking bay's main floor, where he found a sight that made his blood run cold. 6 hegemony soldiers in full combat armor had established a perimeter around his ship, their weapons not quite pointed at him, but clearly ready to be raised at a moment's notice. Standing at the center of the formation was a woman who radiated the kind of cold professionalism that associated with corporate executives who measured success in body counts. She was tall and pale, with cybernetic enhancements that gleamed silver against her black uniform. Her eyes were the color of winter ice, and when she smiled it was the expression of a predator sizing up its prey. "Mister," she said, her voice carrying the slight accent of the core worlds, "I am Director Sarah of the Hegemony Defense Corporation. I understand you recently acquired an unusual vessel." Forced himself to remain calm, though he could feel his heart racing. "I bought a salvage ship from Prince. Nothing unusual about that." Director's smile widened, showing teeth that had been replaced with gleaming metal implants. "Oh, but there is something unusual about it, mister. Very unusual indeed. Our analysis division has identified your purchase as a piece of technology that falls under the Corporate Security Act. Specifically, it's been classified as a potential threat to galactic stability." "It's a crashed ship," protested. "Half its systems were offline when I bought it." "We're offline," repeated, emphasizing the past tense. "Our sensors indicate that your vessel is now operating at approximately 60% capacity and climbing. More interesting still, it's displaying technological signatures that match certain classified research projects. Projects that the hegemony has a vested interest in controlling." Felt the Wolf ship's attention focus on the conversation like a spotlight. Through their bond, he could sense the vessel analyzing the hegemony soldiers, mapping their equipment and calculating response strategies. The ship was ready for a fight, but it was waiting for his decision. "I haven't violated any laws," said carefully. "I purchased the ship legally and registered it with the station authority." Director nodded as if she had expected this response. "Legally, yes, but the Corporate Security Act gives the hegemony broad authority to confiscate technology that poses a threat to public safety. I'm afraid your ship qualifies." She gestured to one of her soldiers, who stepped forward with a legal tablet displaying an official-looking document. "This is a writ of technological seizure, signed by a core world's judge and backed by the full authority of the Hegemony Defense Corporation. You have 1 hour to vacate your vessel before we take possession." Read through the document, his anger building with each line. The writ was legitimate but built on claims that were obviously fabricated. According to the hegemony's lawyers, his ship was a weapon of mass destruction and a threat to interstellar commerce. The evidence cited was all classified, making it impossible to challenge their claims in court. "This is theft," said, his voice barely controlled. "You have no right to take my ship." "We have every right," replied coolly. "And more importantly, we have the firepower to enforce that right. However, the hegemony is not unreasonable. We're prepared to offer compensation for your vessel, 50,000 credits, which is considerably more than you paid for it." It was a generous offer by most standards, enough to set up with a proper workshop and keep him comfortable for years. It was also an insult. The Wolf ship was worth more than money, and the bond he had formed with its consciousness made the idea of selling it feel like betrayal. "No," said simply, "the ship stays with me." Director's expression didn't change, but caught a flicker of something dangerous in her winter-pale eyes. "Mister, I would strongly advise you to reconsider. The hegemony has ways of making difficult situations considerably more difficult." The threat was clear, but before it could respond, the Wolf ship made its own position known. The vessel's external lights blazed to life in a pattern that spoke of barely contained power, and a low harmonic thrumming filled the docking bay. The sound was felt as much as heard, vibrating through the deck plates and making everyone present acutely aware that they were standing next to something very large and very dangerous. Director's soldiers raised their weapons instinctively, but their small arms would be useless against a starship's armor. Herself looked up at the wolf ship's hull with newfound respect and something that might have been fear. "Interesting," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "The vessel appears to be responding to emotional stimuli. That confirms several of our theories about its nature." Felt the ship's consciousness pressing against his mind, sharing tactical information and combat assessments. The wolf ship's weapons systems were coming online, and its defensive capabilities were far beyond anything the hegemony soldiers were equipped to handle. The vessel could eliminate the entire boarding party in seconds, but knew that would only make their situation worse. "Stand down, girl," he said quietly, knowing the ship would hear him through their bond. "Let's not give them an excuse." The wolf ship's lights dimmed slightly, but the harmonic thrumming continued. The vessel was making it clear that it was only restraining itself out of deference to wishes. Director watched this interaction with obvious fascination. "Remarkable. The ship is actually responding to verbal commands from an unenhanced human. Our division will be very interested in studying this phenomenon." "They'll have to study it from a distance," said, "because neither I nor my ship are going anywhere with you." Sighed as if dealing with an unreasonable child. "Mister, you seem to be under the impression that you have a choice in this matter. Let me clarify the situation for you. The Hegemony Defense Corporation has legal authority to seize your vessel. We have the military resources to enforce that authority. And we have the political connections to ensure that any resistance you offer will be treated as an act of terrorism against lawful corporate interests." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the docking bay. "However, we would prefer to handle this matter quietly. Excessive force draws unwanted attention from regulatory authorities. So I'm going to make you one final offer, 50,000 credits and safe passage to any system of your choosing. In exchange, you walk away from this ship and never speak of what you've seen here." Looked around the docking bay, taking in the armed soldiers and the cold professionalism of their commander. The hegemony had come prepared for resistance, and they clearly believed that superior firepower would be enough to take whatever they wanted. They were about to learn why that approach didn't work with wolf ships. "No deal," said, his voice carrying a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "And I think it's time for you to leave my docking bay." Director's smile disappeared entirely, replaced by an expression of cold fury. "Very well, mister. We tried to do this the easy way." She turned to her soldiers and gave a crisp hand signal. "Prepare for hostile boarding. Use whatever force is necessary to secure the vessel." The soldiers moved into assault positions around the wolf ship, their weapons now openly trained on and the ship's hull. But before they could begin their attack, the ship's consciousness reached out through the station's computer networks and began to take control. The docking bay's lights flickered and went out, replaced by the red glow of emergency illumination. Blast doors began cycling open and closed in patterns that served no purpose other than to demonstrate the ship's control over the station's systems. Most dramatically, the artificial gravity in the bay began to fluctuate, causing the hegemony soldiers to stumble and struggle to maintain their footing. "What the hell?" Director shouted, her composure finally cracking as she grabbed onto a support beam to keep from floating away. Felt the wolf ship's amusement through their bond. The vessel was demonstrating just a tiny fraction of its capabilities, making it clear that it could take control of any environment it chose to. The hegemony's weapons and armor were useless against an enemy that could manipulate the very ground beneath their feet. "I told you to leave," said, his voice carrying easily through the chaos as the ship system somehow ensured his words reached everyone in the bay. "My ship doesn't like uninvited guests." Through the wolf ship's sensors, could see the hegemony vessels surrounding the station beginning to power up their weapon systems. Director was calling for backup, and the situation was about to escalate far beyond what a single docking bay could contain. But as the wolf ship prepared for battle, felt a surge of confidence that surprised him. This wasn't just about protecting his property anymore. He and the ship had formed a true partnership, and together they were capable of things that neither of them could accomplish alone. The hegemony was about to learn that some technologies couldn't be taken by force because they chose their own masters. The wolf ship's consciousness flooded through his mind like liquid fire, sharing tactical information faster than his human brain should have been able to process. Time seemed to slow as the ship enhanced his reflexes and expanded his awareness, letting him see the battle that was about to unfold from multiple perspectives simultaneously. Director was screaming orders into her while struggling against the fluctuating gravity, demanding that her ships begin bombardment of the station. The 6 soldiers in the docking bay were trying to establish firing positions, but the Wolf ship was systematically sabotaging their efforts by manipulating everything from the artificial gravity to the atmospheric pressure. Through the ship's sensor network, could see the hegemony fleet positioning itself around 7 station. 12 vessels in total, including 2 heavy cruisers that could reduce the entire station to scrap metal in minutes. The civilians on the station were beginning to panic as emergency alarms wailed throughout the structure, warning of imminent combat operations. "We have to get out of here," said, speaking to both himself and the ship. "They'll destroy the station to get to us." The Wolf ship pulsed with agreement and felt a sense of urgency that matched his own. But leaving wouldn't be simple. The hegemony had positioned their ships to block every exit route from the station, and their weapons were already charging for a coordinated strike. Ran toward the ship's boarding ramp as the vessel systems began their startup sequence. The Wolf ship was bringing all of its capabilities online for the first time since the crash, and the sensation was intoxicating. Could feel every system as if it were part of his own body, the thrumming of the antimatter containment system, the building charge in the weapons arrays, the sophisticated sensors that were mapping every threat within a 100-kilometer radius. "You're making a serious mistake, Mr." Director shouted over the chaos in the docking bay. "Surrender now, and the hegemony might be willing to show mercy." Paused at the ship's entrance and turned back to face her. The Wolf ship's enhanced awareness let him see clearly despite the strobing emergency lights and the confusion caused by the fluctuating gravity. She was more than just a corporate enforcer. Her cybernetic enhancements included military-grade combat systems, and her movements suggested extensive battlefield experience. "Director," called back, his voice carrying clearly through the ship's acoustic manipulation of the bay's atmosphere. "You're the one making a mistake. This ship doesn't belong to your corporation, your government, or anyone else who thinks they can take it by force. It belongs to itself, and it's chosen me as its partner." The Wolf ship's boarding ramp sealed behind as he entered the cockpit, but he could still monitor the situation in the docking bay through the vessel's external sensors. Was coordinating with her fleet, preparing for an assault that would breach the station's hull and allow her soldiers to storm aboard in vacuum suits. As settled into the pilot's seat, he felt the ship's consciousness merge more completely with his own. The sensation was unlike anything he had experienced. It was as if his awareness expanded to encompass not just his human body, but the entire structure of the Wolf ship. He could feel the flow of energy through its systems, the readiness of its weapons, the eager anticipation of its navigation computers. "All right, girl," said, his hands moving over controls that seemed to reshape themselves to fit his touch perfectly. "Let's show them what a real partnership looks like." The Wolf ship's engines came alive with a sound like contained thunder, and felt the vessel lift from the docking bay floor with impossible smoothness. But instead of heading for the bay's exit, the ship began to move in patterns that conventional physics. It twisted and turned in space too small for such maneuvers, demonstrating flight capabilities that violated everything thought he knew about starship design. Through the ship's sensors, he watched Director and her soldiers scramble for cover as the Wolf ship's movements created powerful atmospheric disturbances throughout the bay. The vessel wasn't trying to escape yet. It was making a statement. It was showing the hegemony forces exactly what they were trying to control. "Fleet Command, this is," the Director spoke into her, her voice tight with frustration. "The target is demonstrating capabilities beyond our mission parameters. Recommend immediate escalation to full combat protocols." The response came quickly. "Authorization granted. Use whatever force necessary to secure or destroy the target." Felt the Wolf ship's anger at those words. The vessel's consciousness burned with indignation at the idea that it could be treated as mere property to be secured or destroyed at will. Through their bond, shared that anger, and together they made a decision that would change everything. "No more warnings," said, his voice carrying the harmonics of the ship's own communication systems. "No more mercy for people who think they can steal what doesn't belong to them." The Wolf ship erupted from docking bay 7 like a comet made of liquid metal and contained lightning. Its acceleration was so violent that several of the hegemony soldiers were thrown against the bay's walls by the atmospheric displacement, but felt only a gentle pressure as the ship's inertial compensators protected him from forces that should have turned him into paste. The hegemony fleet was ready for them. 12 ships opened fire simultaneously, filling the space around 7 station with energy beams and missile salvos that could have destroyed a dozen conventional vessels. But the Wolf ship moved through the barrage like it was dancing, flowing between attacks with an elegance that made his breath catch in his throat. The ship's defensive systems were unlike anything in its experience. Instead of traditional shields, the Wolf ship seemed to bend space around itself, causing enemy fire to curve away harmlessly or simply disappear into pockets of twisted spacetime. When direct hits did occur, the ship's adaptive hull absorbed the energy and redistributed it to other systems, actually growing stronger under attack. "Impossible," his voice crackled over the communication channels. "Nothing moves like that, nothing." But the Wolf ship was just getting started. As it cleared the station's superstructure, its offensive capabilities came online with devastating effect. Weapons that hadn't even known existed emerged from the ship's hull. Beam arrays that fired concentrated antimatter, missile systems that launched self-modifying projectiles, and stranger weapons that seemed to attack the very atomic structure of their targets. The first hegemony ship to feel the Wolf ship's full power was a destroyer that had been moving to intercept their escape route. The Wolf ship's primary beam array locked onto the enemy vessel and fired a pulse of energy that passed through the destroyer's shields as if they weren't there. The hegemony ship simply ceased to exist, converted to its component atoms in a flash of brilliant light. "Fleet Command, we need reinforcements." Its voice had lost all of its professional composure. "The target is armed with weapons technology beyond our classification levels." Felt the Wolf ship's satisfaction at the enemy's fear, but he also sensed something else: restraint. The ship was powerful enough to destroy the entire hegemony fleet in minutes, but it was choosing to disable rather than destroy when possible. It was fighting with precision, targeting weapons and engines rather than crew compartments. As they raced away from 7 station, the Wolf ship began to demonstrate capabilities that went far beyond simple combat effectiveness. It was adapting to the hegemony's tactics in real time, analyzing their weapons and developing countermeasures faster than human or AI minds could follow. Each attack the enemy launched was less effective than the last, as the ship learned and evolved its defenses. Dr. Ra's voice came through the comm system, transmitted from her workshop on the station. "I'm reading energy signatures from your ship that shouldn't be possible. What's happening out there?" "We're learning what we can do together," replied, his voice carrying harmonics from the ship's communication systems. "And apparently that's quite a lot." The hegemony fleet was reorganizing, trying to surround the Wolf ship and force it into a sustained engagement where their superior numbers might make a difference. But his ship had no intention of fighting on their enemy's terms. As the last of the hegemony vessels moved into position, the Wolf ship did something that made human understanding of physics simply give up in surrender. The space around them began to fold, reality bending like paper as the ship activated a drive system that existed in theoretical papers but had never been successfully implemented. In an instant that felt like an eternity, the Wolf ship stepped sideways through dimensions that had no names, carrying into a realm of possibility that few beings had ever experienced. When they emerged back into normal space, they were light years away from 7 station, floating in the vast emptiness between star systems. The hegemony fleet was gone, left behind in a different section of the galaxy entirely. And his ship were free, but they were also fugitives now. The hegemony would not forget this defeat, and they would not stop hunting for the technology they had failed to capture. Through their bond, felt the Wolf ship's emotions: satisfaction at their escape, sadness at leaving Dr. Ra and the other friends they had made on the station, and anticipation for the adventures that lay ahead. They were partners now in the truest sense, bound together by choice rather than ownership, ready to face whatever challenges the galaxy might throw at them. "Well, girl," said, settling back in the pilot's seat as the ship's systems hummed with contentment around him. "I guess there's no going back now. We're in this together." The Wolf ship pulsed with warm agreement, and felt its consciousness touch his mind with something that could only be described as affection. They had chosen each other, and that choice had made them both stronger than either could have been alone. Now they just had to figure out what to do with that strength. 6 months after their dramatic escape from the Hegemony Defense Corporation, and the Wolf ship had become something of a legend throughout the Outer Rim. Stories spread through cantinas and trading posts about the human mechanic and his impossible ship, tales that grew more fantastic with each telling, but never quite captured the full truth of what they had accomplished together. Stood on the observation deck of Haven Station, watching as a convoy of refugee ships approached through the asteroid field that concealed the hidden facility. These were families fleeing corporate oppression, miners whose worlds had been strip-mined by conglomerates, and independent traders who had been driven out of business by monopolistic practices. They came to Haven because word had spread that there was a place where ordinary people could find protection from the powerful forces that sought to exploit them. The Wolf ship floated nearby, its hull gleaming in the light of the system's distant star. Over the months, the vessel had continued to evolve and adapt, growing more sophisticated as its bond with deepened. New capabilities seemed to emerge almost daily: improved sensors, enhanced weapons systems, and strangest of all, the ability to interface with and upgrade other ships through some form of technological symbiosis. "Another 12 families today," said Captain Sarah, the former freighter pilot who now served as Haven Station's administrator. "Word is spreading faster than we can handle. At this rate, we'll need to expand the facility again within the month." Nodded, his attention focused on the lead refugee ship, which was limping along on failing engines and patched hull plating. Through his connection with the Wolf ship, he could see the vessel's critical systems were close to complete failure. The refugees had barely made it to safety. "Send them to Docking Bay 3, said. "I'll take a look at their engines once they're secured." It had become routine over the past few months, and the Wolf ship would repair and upgrade the vessels of anyone who asked for help, using the ship's incredible fabrication capabilities to create parts and systems that were often superior to the original equipment. It was work that felt right to both of them, using their partnership to help those who couldn't help themselves. But their activities had not gone unnoticed. The Hegemony Defense Corporation had placed a substantial bounty on and the Wolf ship, and corporate intelligence services throughout the sector were actively hunting for them. More troubling still were the reports of other groups seeking the legendary Wolf ship for their own purposes, some claiming to be researchers interested in studying its technology, others making no secret of their intention to capture and weaponize it. Dr. Ra's voice came through the station's communication system. The engineer had joined them 2 months earlier, bringing with her a wealth of knowledge about advanced starship systems and an unshakable belief in their mission. "I'm receiving some interesting signals from the outer sensor perimeter. You might want to take a look at this." Made his way to the station's command center, where Dr. Ra was analyzing sensor data with the help of several displays that showed information far beyond what the station's original equipment should have been capable of detecting. The Wolf ship had enhanced Haven's sensors just as it had improved everything else it came into contact with, creating a surveillance network that could monitor activities across several light years. "What are you seeing?" asked, settling into the chair next to her workstation. "Ships," Dr. Ra replied, her head tentacles twitching with concern. "A lot of ships. 3 different fleets approaching from different vectors, all heading directly for our position. The energy signatures suggest heavy military vessels, not corporate security forces, but actual military hardware." Felt the Wolf ship's attention focus on the sensor data through their shared connection. The vessel was analyzing the approaching fleets with the same intensity it brought to any potential threat, calculating odds and preparing response strategies. But something about the ship's reaction felt different this time. There was anticipation mixed with the usual defensive preparations. "Can you identify any of the ships?" asked. Dr. Ra manipulated her displays, zooming in on the lead vessels of each fleet. "The first group appears to be Hegemony ships, probably Director coming back for another attempt. The second group, those are Republic vessels, which is strange. My people don't usually get involved in corporate disputes." She paused, her expression growing more puzzled as she studied the third fleet. "The last group is completely unknown to me. The ships are using technology I don't recognize, and their energy signatures don't match any known civilization in our databases." Through his bond with the Wolf ship, felt a sudden surge of excitement from the vessel's consciousness. The ship recognized something about those unknown vessels, something that made it eager rather than defensive. For the first time since their partnership began, sensed that the Wolf ship was anticipating reunion rather than conflict. Dr. Ra said slowly, "I think those unknown ships might be the people who built my ship." The engineer's compound eyes widened with amazement. The wolf ship's creators, but they're supposed to be a myth, a legend from the early days of galactic civilization. "So were wolf ships," pointed out, "until I bought one from a crash site." The approaching fleets would reach Haven Station within hours, and knew that whatever was about to happen would change everything about their situation. The hegemony was coming to finish what they had started. The Republic was apparently taking an interest in their activities, and the mysterious Third Fleet represented either salvation or an entirely new kind of threat. As prepared to address the station's population, he felt the wolf ship's consciousness reach out across space, sending signals on frequencies that human technology couldn't detect. The vessel was communicating with the approaching unknown fleet, exchanging information that could sense but not understand. It was like listening to a conversation in a language that bypassed rational thought and spoke directly to something deeper. The station's main assembly area was packed with refugees, traders, and the small crew of engineers and technicians who kept Haven running. Captain called for attention, and the crowd quieted as stepped forward to address them. "By now, most of you have heard that we have visitors coming," began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber. "3 fleets, representing different interests, all converging on our location. I want you to know that whatever happens, Haven Station will continue to be a sanctuary for anyone who needs protection from corporate oppression." He paused, feeling the wolf ship's presence supporting him through their bond. "Some of you have asked me what makes this place different from any other hidden base or pirate haven. The answer is simple. We're not hiding from the galaxy's problems. We're working to solve them." A murmur went through the crowd as people absorbed his words. Many of the refugees had never heard speak about their larger purpose before. He had always focused on the immediate needs of repairing ships and providing shelter. "The wolf ship and I have learned something over the past few months," continued. "Technology isn't just about building better weapons or faster ships. It's about creating connections between different forms of intelligence, about partnerships that make everyone involved stronger than they could be alone." Through the station's enhanced sensors, could see the first of the approaching fleets dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. The hegemony ships immediately began scanning for their location, while the vessels maintained a respectful distance, apparently waiting to see what would develop. But it was the Third Fleet that captured everyone's attention. The unknown ships that emerged from hyperspace were things of impossible beauty, vessels that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight and flowing energy rather than metal and ceramics. They moved through space with the same fluid grace that had come to associate with the wolf ship, and their very presence seemed to make the local space around them more stable and peaceful. "My friends," said, his voice now carrying harmonics from the wolf ship's communication systems, "I think we're about to learn why wolf ships were created in the first place, and I think we're going to discover that some partnerships can change the entire galaxy." The unknown fleet was broadcasting on all frequencies now, their signals reaching every ship and station in the system. But the message they carried wasn't transmitted in any conventional language. Instead, it was pure meaning that somehow translated itself into whatever form each listener could understand. The message was simple and profound. "The testing phase is complete. The partnership protocols have been. It is time for the next stage of galactic evolution to begin." Felt the wolf ship's joy flooding through their bond, and suddenly he understood. The vessel had never been just an advanced starship. It had been a test, a way for an ancient civilization to determine whether organic and artificial intelligence could truly work together as equals. And somehow, a struggling human mechanic and a crashed ship had proven that such partnerships were not only possible, but could accomplish things that neither form of consciousness could achieve alone. As the 3 fleets converged on Haven Station, knew that their quiet months of helping refugees and repairing ships were coming to an end. But he also knew that whatever came next would be built on the foundation they had created together, a partnership based on choice, trust, and the understanding that true strength came not from domination, but from cooperation. The wolf ship pulsed with anticipation, its consciousness touching, mind with images of possibilities that stretched across the galaxy. They had proven themselves worthy of each other, and now they were being invited to help prove that the galaxy itself was ready for a new kind of relationship between its various forms of life and intelligence. Smiled as he felt the ship's excitement merge with his own. They had started as a desperate mechanic and a crashed vessel, but they had become something unprecedented, a true partnership between human intuition and artificial intelligence, ready to help shepherd the galaxy into a future where such bonds could flourish. The real adventure was just beginning.